Welcome to the Alpha Human Podcast. I'm your host, Lawrence Rosenberg, and today's guest is Master Sergeant Darrell Utt, a Green Beret who served 26 years in the Army and in Special Forces, where he led high-stakes missions in Iraq and the Balkans and played pivotal roles in high-stakes operations such as personnel capture missions in Bosnia, counter-sniper security for Presidents Clinton and Bush, and early operations alongside Kurdish Peshmerga forces in northern Iraq. Darrell's accolades include 5 Bronze Stars, one of which was awarded for his valor during his 2006 deployment to Baghdad. And under his leadership, his team of Green Berets was recognized as the best in the 10th Special Forces Group with the prestigious Larry Thorne Award. Additionally, he was honored with the 2007 Robert T. Frederick Award for Military Excellence, a testament to his exemplary service and the impact he made on the Special Forces community. Now, Darrell is also the author of a new book that's just come out entitled Grit to Glory, a Green Beret's journey from West Virginia to the streets of Baghdad, which delves into the principles, challenges, and triumphs that have defined his life and his career. And through this book, and as a mentor and speaker, Darrell continues to inspire the next generation of leaders and warriors. Darrell, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lawrence. It's an honor to be here, and I'm all fired up, man. I'm ready to go back through Special Forces training after that intro. Like, man, you got my juices going, man. I'm ready to go.
Let's do it, man. Let's do it. I'll tell you what, I read your book, Grit to Glory, and I'll tell you what, it strikes a powerful balance, like equal parts humble, right? So you got lots of humility, vulnerability, and candor, alongside supreme confidence in your ability to perform at the highest level as an elite operator and warrior. I found the book to be an incredible blend of exciting storytelling and practical guidance for achieving really big goals. And I think best of all, it's inspiring, but it's also actionable. So, Darrell, what motivated you to write the book in this unique way, not just as a biography, but as a playbook for life?
Well, I can't take all the credit for this, Lawrence. Certainly, I cannot take all the credit. I had a wonderful, very talented, very professional, articulate co-author in Lauren Ungaldi, and we put our minds together, and we were able to come up with kind of a roadmap for how we wanted this book, how we wanted it to flow, and what our message was going to be. And that was so important, was to do those exercises, early into the process. And I remember her asking me, some of these questions like, "Hey, Darrell, tell me a little bit about maybe some of your favorite books." And you can see one that's behind me over my shoulder. One of them, actually two of them. One of them is Black Hawk Down. The other one's Fearless. And the one that's not there is Red Platoon by Clint Romeshay. Those are probably three of my top, favorite military books. Just love the way Red Platoon, it kind of like takes you on that roller coaster. So that's kind of like where we started forming, like, how do you want this book to go? If you're a reader, you want to be able to suck the people in, and it's going to be a hard time for them to put it down. So hopefully you experienced that, Lawrence, that it was hard for you to put down. And then just to kind of have those life lessons and be authentic and to be vulnerable, like you said. And that was very important for Lauren, because Lauren was like, "Hey, so many times in military books and other types of books, where you only read the mountaintop or the success stories, you don't see the person, drag and clawing their way up, and they're exhausted, and they're physically and mentally, exhausted as well." So it was very important for Lauren. It was like, "Hey, we got to show the highlights, of course, but we need to show the low lights as well, because that's how people are going to really be able to, the story is going to resonate with these folks when they can read about your vulnerabilities and they see that you're authentic." So that was very important. Now, Lawrence, was it hard for you to put the book down?
Yeah, you know what? I'm a fast reader, but if a book, so I know when a book is good is when I have to stop and like reread it and kind of just go slower. So that's kind of like my litmus test or metric for whether or not a book is gripping, is that if I'm blazing through it, and I read a lot of books, so if I'm blazing through it, hey, it's just read it to read it and get it done. But with your book, for instance, I kept having to stop and read it again and again and again. So some of your stories are really powerful. So yeah, I think it did take me on that roller coaster ride. But again, what I love about the roller coaster is that we kept stopping to kind of get some learnings, some teachings, some some mindset that I can take away and that others can take away. So that's what I just appreciate, that kind of mix of action packed, really like wild stuff that's taking place there, but also, hey, here's some lessons. So I love that.
Yeah, one thing that I think that's interesting, Lawrence, is I sent this book, and this person is in the book. He's one of my former commanders, and I'll give him a shout out now. Gary Bloomberg. He was a former Special Forces commander of mine. He was a mentor of mine. He's still a mentor, still a really good friend. But I think this is kind of a funny story, and it goes along with what you're saying. I sent him my manuscript, advanced copy of the manuscript, and he was reading through it. Well, I was so excited to get his feedback and basically to get his approval as, as a former commander and a Special Forces colleague, that I reached out to him. I know he didn't have time to read the book. I knew he didn't have time, but he was like halfway through, and I reached out to him. I said, Gary, I'm dying here, man. I just have to know, like, what are you thinking? Because like Lauren and I, we were, we had the book for a long time. We were the ones that were constantly reading it. So when it was time to get testimonials and to get other people's feedback, it was really important for us to hear that feedback coming back. But I said, Gary, I know you're probably not through. And he goes, you're right, Darrell, I'm not through. I'm like halfway through. And I said, okay, well, can you share with me what you think so far? And he goes, well, I think it's really good. But I do have one thing that you could have improved on, and I don't want to hurt your feelings, but I think it's pretty important. And I said, okay, Gary, I have so much respect for you. Let's hear it. And he goes, well, you talk about some of these leadership type things. You talk about calm breeds calm, or control what you can control. Like I'm reading this and I know exactly what you mean, but for the people that might be reading it that aren't really as in tune to the military and tactics and techniques and procedures and all those things, they might not get it. So it would have been really great if you could have maybe explained those things a little bit more. And it took my frown, upside down to a smile, because I was like, Gary, I love that feedback and I appreciate it. But if you hang on, you're going to get a lot of that toward the end of the book, where
Awesome.
we really break down the grit code and what it means and all of that stuff. So I just think that's some really cool, kind of behind the scenes stuff that was going on. And I think that was important. And Lauren, once again, Lauren and Gowdy, it was really important for her. It was like, Darrell, we have to capture these lessons. Like I said, I can't take all the credit for this, but she's like, let's take these lessons and capture these, because what you're talking about in grit code, it transcends, occupations. This could be for military, it could be for entrepreneurs, for business, for college, high school kids. I mean, it totally transcends. So we have to break out some of these lessons. And I'm so glad that she did. I'm very thankful, very grateful that I had such a talented co-author.
Phenomenal. Yeah, no, that's phenomenal. So I'll tell you what, let's dive in, because I'm excited to hear how you respond to some of this stuff. So I'm going to quote you from the book. You say that everything that you've ever achieved in life is a result of hard work, not natural talent. You say that I have never been the most physically fit, articulate, skilled, or sociable. Far too often, people have underestimated the depth of my capabilities because I don't fit the stereotype that most expect from a warrior. So my question for you is, Darrell, what's that stereotype? And how did you get past it to not only become a Green Beret, which is hard enough, and as elite as it gets when it comes to special operations, but beyond that, to develop into a leader whose ODA ends up receiving a designation as the best team in the entire 10 Special Force group? How do you go from not fitting the stereotype, right, to actually ascending within the special forces the way you did?
Yeah, that's a great question, Lawrence. And I think this is something that, we got guys and gals dealing with this every single day right now as we speak, as you and I are sitting here speaking and chatting. And some people call it imposter syndrome. I'm sure there's a bunch of different ways you can define it. But in my mind, the stereotypical special operations warrior, and especially this was in my mind when I went through Special Forces assessment and selection at Fort Bragg back in the fall of 1996. I had this stereotype that to be a Green Beret, you needed to be like 6'3", 6'5". You needed to be like an NFL linebacker or, a running back, or you needed to be, 5'10" to 6'1" and about a buck 70 and just an absolute gazelle,
Mm.
that could run and ruck all day long. So in my mind, that was kind of like the stereotype that I was dealing with, that what I thought that they wanted and they were looking for in a Green Beret. And that's very aesthetic. I know, like
Mhm.
that's just very aesthetic. There's a lot more that goes into it. And I feel like that's what I was able to learn about myself. Like, okay, I'm definitely not 6'3" to 6'5". Never, be pointed out as like, man, that dude could probably play in the NFL or whatever. Like, I was never that guy. I was never the gazelle that could run, 2 minute, 11-minute miles or 11-minute 2 miles. So I was never the fastest dude, but I did have some things that worked in my favor, and I had that hard work ethic. I was humble, and there was no way I was ever going to quit. In my mind, it was like, you're going to have to drag me out of this place. That's the only way I'm leaving, because I'm not going to just voluntarily quit. So I learned that those are some things that they are really, really looking at and are really important for the instructors and the cadre out there
Mm.
at the schoolhouse. So yeah, I had to get over that stereotype that not every single Green Beret looks like an NFL linebacker or a gazelle. That there's a lot of ordinary people just like me. I felt like I was an ordinary guy. Um, yes, I could run and yes, I could ruck, but I was never the fastest, never the slowest. I was kind of like in between.
Mm.
But I tell you this, Lawrence, there's a lot of ordinary guys and gals out there that are able to do extraordinary things because they have it up here. They're very mentally tough. And I like to give credit to my mother. And I talk about it in the book. Like my dad taught me all the guy stuff and sports and hunting and fishing and trapping and all those things. But I really, really felt like my mom is the one that made me really mentally tough because she was such a tough woman.
Okay. So going on from that, then speaking about your childhood and your mom and your dad, you said that in attempting to join the Army Special Forces, that your childhood experiences helped you become a Green Beret, right? That your hunting experiences as a kid made you a better marksman. You said I was intimately familiar with firearms and had a heightened awareness in the woods, which served me well during my training and beyond. You said, thanks for that, Dad. And besides that, you said I wasn't afraid of a little pain. Thanks, Mom. The small town boy from West Virginia has made it to the big leagues. So here's what I want to mention about your childhood, because this is a really powerful perspective, that a spin that you put on what others might perceive to be a somewhat of a dark childhood, right? So you say, quote, like most kids of my generation, I grew up getting hit with spatulas, wooden spoons, anything else my mom can get her hands on. But in my family, things went a little further than a switch on the backside. My mom often came home from work with a busted lip or a black eye from altercations with mental health patients. My father's battle with alcoholism exacerbated the strain on their already rocky relationship. The toxic cycle of their arguments often spiraled into violence, leaving my mother to bear the brunt of the pain. And far too often, my mom would get one black eye from work and another to match it when my dad got his hands on her at home. Maybe that's why mom got physical with us kids, me, my brother, my sister. My poor sister always took the brunt of mom's violent outbursts. Years later, she would thank me for saving her life one day when I ran inside from mowing the lawn to help pull mom off of her. Mom was one tough lady. I'll give her credit for that. She sure made us tough as well. So, Darrell, most people coming out of an upbringing like this would walk away with emotional scars, psychological pain, depression, anger. But instead, you've reframed it with an incredible sense of gratitude, which you just expressed now before I went into this, for gratitude for the strength and toughness it gave you. I got to say, it's rare in this day and age to see someone take an experience like that and pull something empowering from it. How did how did you cultivate that perspective?
Yeah, that's deep, man. That's deep. That's interesting. I think it was just through my experiences, Lawrence, my life lessons, and I'm sure, if I went back, I wasn't always positive about it. I remember growing up in school and having less than a lot of the others, and I would be frustrated with that. I wasn't wearing Nike and Converse shoes on my feet. I was wearing blue light special stuff from Kmart, and hand me downs and all of those type of things. So
Mhm.
I think that I got the gratitude and being thankful as I progressed through life. And I started seeing that I was just a little bit tougher than some of the other guys. And I think one of the first times I probably realized it was when I was it was actually before basic training started. So I was 18 years old. I graduated high school in June of 1990. I
Mhm.
entered the Army in July of 1990, the next month. And they have like a holding place before the actual drill sergeants come and get you, and then you start, actual basic training. So it's not like a happy grand place, but it's not like basic training yet either. So you're kind of like in this middle gray area.
Mhm.
But I remember every night the lights would go out, and then I would start hearing people cry. And
Really?
for the life of me, I had the slightest idea like what was going on. I was very naive. And then finally, after a couple nights, I asked someone. I said, "Hey, uh, do you know? I'm sure you hear this, but every night when the lights go out, there's all these people that are crying. Like, what the hell's going on?"
Mhm.
And the guy looked at me. He's like, "You really don't know?" And I was like, "I have the slightest idea." And he's like, "These kids are homesick. They've never been away from home. This is their first few days away from their mom and dad." And I was like, "Oh shit. Okay." The light bulb moment for me. But
Wow.
that was kind of like one of those small little building blocks like, hey, I'm a tougher kid than a lot of these other kids.
Okay, so that's interesting. So I'll go back also to that, again, before you're in the military, maybe when you're in high school, you say you were, you said you always played sports year round, baseball, basketball, football. Um, but you described the extraordinary lengths you went to as a kid to meet the league's weight requirements when it came to football. You said that playing as a fullback and defensive end, you said you were an above average player, but the league's age and weight setup pushed you to starve yourself to meet the requirements. And you said that on more than one occasion, you deprived yourself of food for days on end, and you wore a garbage bag to lose the water weight for the weigh-ins. And you said that, your team didn't win often, but you did gain valuable lessons on toughness, hard work, positivity, resilience, and overcoming adversity through those experiences. So clearly you're starting to build this tough mindset, right? What
Yeah.
drove you going back that early? Like, what's driving you to push yourself that hard? I mean, like, how did you then, if you're reflecting on it now, how did you develop the mental toughness and self-control to overcome what your brain and body, was demanding of you, right? Because fasting for days on end as a kid is a lot different than the physical resilience typically needed to excel in sports. So
Yeah.
that kind of gets into the mental game of mastering the
Yeah,
mind.
definitely.
How,
Yeah.
how, how did that
Yeah.
come about?
Definitely. And I wish I could sit here today, Lawrence, and tell you that I was, when I was fasting, it was like perfect and there was never not a midnight run on donuts, in the cabinet or whatever.
No doubt.
Because I did have those weak moments. But, for whatever reason, like going back to like some family type stuff. Um, my older brother and my older sister, they did really well in school. They were in the band. But my dad, for whatever reason, didn't seem to be that interested in what they were doing. And maybe it was because I was the baby, and I like to do some of the things that he liked to do,
Hmm.
but I got 100% of his attention. And it was like I was like a work project for him. It was like maybe he had some guilt. I don't know. And my father and mother are both deceased, so I won't never figure out this answer.
Hmm.
But maybe he felt some guilt because he had kind of missed it on my older brother and sister. So he dumped a lot of energy and effort and time into me. So I think that was definitely one part to answer your question, Lawrence. It was like, I didn't want to let my dad down. I didn't want to let my fellow football players, my coaches down. And actually, in addition to the garbage bag and running laps around the neighborhood and losing water weight, my head football coach in midget league also took me to the sauna. So, man, terrible, terrible looking back on that, because I got wrapped up into this vicious cycle. Because if you could just imagine this, where I'm not eating very much at all during the week, and I'm trying to make this magic weigh in on Saturday morning so I can play football.
Hmm.
And it's kind of like, this isn't a good fair comparison, but like when the UFC fighters, they do their weigh in
Yep.
and then they go and they gain like 20 or 30 pounds, and that's the weight that they fight at.
Yep.
So this is a terrible analogy, but the same thing kind of happened to us, but we had a shorter time window. Like I would make my way in Saturday morning,
Hmm.
and then I'm at the football field, so I have access to the concession stand, and as a reward, I would be able to eat hot dogs and pizza and all these things. So it really was a vicious cycle, man, because after the game, I'm trying to play with that type of,
Hmm.
food that's propelling me. But yeah, definitely a vicious cycle. But I think a lot of it, was trying to please my dad, and, didn't want to let him down, didn't want to let my coaches down, didn't want to let my teammates down. And
Mm.
I started learning at that age, like I kind of got that feeling that, my team, even though I was young, but it was like, hey, my teammates are relying on me to run the ball and to be a good defender. And if we're going to have a chance, I need to really play well. So I think that's when it really started in my young mind, is wanting to be that good teammate, that good team player.
Interesting. Interesting. Because I noticed, what you didn't say there, and which I kind of get, having spoken with so many different special operators, team guys, Green Berets. Although Green Berets less so, and certainly Delta, given how often you guys might kind of have more leeway in going on smaller group operations. Certainly, the guys in the teams will kind of credit their success based on not wanting to let the team down, right? And that's certainly a sports thing as well. You do well, it's not, I didn't want to let, so what I didn't hear from you was I didn't want to let myself down, right? You were like, I want to let my dad down. Don't want to let my coach down. Don't want to let my team down. And I often find that is kind of an ingredient amongst high achievers, whether it's in special operations, whether it's in sports. You'll kind of hear this. I didn't want to let other people down. So it's quite different when you hear someone say, "I didn't want to let myself down," versus "I didn't want to let other people down." So I thought, yeah, um,
That is actually a very fascinating point. I'm glad you, uh, I mean, that's fascinating for me to hear that you just kind of gleaned that. I was like, wow, man, that's really powerful.
yeah. I mean, I've spoken with Delta guys who, not interested in being part of a team, right? It's like, and it's the lone wolf kind of maverick thing suits certain individuals. But there is a preponderance of super high achievers who don't want to let others down. It's why they do so well. You mentioned your coach. Your coach was a Green Beret, Thornburg, right? He was a Green Beret. And you said he was a sergeant major in the 19th Special Forces, and during your senior year, he took you not just to the sauna, right? Took you guys to Camp Dawson in West Virginia, where you kind of served as like practice subjects for National Guard drill instructors who were training and honing their skills. So I'm gonna quote you. You said they hit you guys with all the classics: the 5 mile runs, the fitness tests, the early morning wake up calls using the metal trash cans and the lids. You, and then you said you learned you went through physical fitness tests, learned drill and ceremony, and you essentially were pushed to your limits. And then after graduating high school, you ended up joining the army. So what was it about that experience that where you kind of connected? Hey, this is a good thing. I'm getting my butt kicked here, but I like it. I want to join the military. Like, what was that about?
Yeah, it's interesting. When the book came out on December 3rd, I was able to do a lot of my book events back in Huntington, West Virginia, which is where I was born and raised. And it had been decades since I had seen or really heard from Coach Thornburg. We had just lost contact. So it was such a treat and such a privilege for me to get picked up by Coach Thornburg at my hotel. And he took me to a special forces meeting in Barbersville, West Virginia, and we got to have breakfast. And he introduced me to his fellow Green Berets from the National Guard and some of the active members of the National Guard. But that was such a treat, such a privilege, and to be able to thank him for his leadership and his guidance and his mentorship. But to get back to your question there. I think Coach Thornburg was one of those guys, in addition to my dad,
Hmm.
was like encouraging me, like, hey, you really should take a look at the military. And to be quite honest, I came from humble beginnings.
Hmm.
My family didn't have money. College was certainly not an option. Getting an athletic scholarship wasn't an option. So I'm very thankful for Coach Thornburg and my dad kind of showing me the light and saying, hey, this is not a bad option for you. Like, this could be a really good thing for you. So I think a combination of their mentorship and their guidance and them kind of pushing, and then actually living a week of it at Camp Dawson, West Virginia, and saying, hey, you know, this isn't so bad, like, I can do this. This isn't terrible. Like, I played football my whole life, to include, we had some really tough football practices my freshman and sophomore year in high school. Like, we got beat up a lot because our team didn't win a lot. So our juniors and seniors would take out their frustrations on us as freshmen and sophomores. So to be able to kind of see, like, hey, the military is not nothing, tougher than what I've been through.
Hmm.
So it kind of just like showed me a little bit of a peek behind the curtain, if you will, and saying, hey, man, you can do this. And I would like to say, for all the listeners out there, to have a little bit of confidence. Like, you're probably a lot tougher. You're probably a lot wiser, a lot smarter than you give yourself credit for. So if it's something that you're chasing, whether it's the military or an elite prestigious university, whatever it is that you're doing, you should chase it down, man. Go get it.
Well, you certainly started to chase it down because after you go in as a light infantryman, you at some point, I believe when you were in Egypt, you said you started to have a new crazy dream, like started forming, right? Like you said, at first it seemed crazy, too lofty, unreachable for a West Virginia boy, but the dream began to solidify into a plan and one that, you would successfully execute or die trying. So you said I was going to become a Green Beret. Where did that dream come from? Right? Like what was it about? Because you didn't it from the way you've written this, it doesn't seem like you went in with, oh, I'm going to be like Coach Thornburg. I want to be a Green Beret. That's it. That's who I want to. You went into the army, and then eventually you start to think, hey, wait a second, like maybe I could be a Green Beret. Where'd that inspiration come from?
Yeah, I think it was my brain catching up with myself because, when I was a high school kid, where kind of that stereotypical high school kid where you know everything. I think looking back, I couldn't even really like wrap my brain around what a Green Beret was when I was playing high school football and Coach Thornburg was my high school football coach. Like, I think it took me a little bit of time to figure out like what that actually meant, what the training was like and the sacrifice and the commitment and all of those things to kind of that you have to put into that to earn that privilege to be a Green Beret. So I think it took my brain a little bit of time, but like most things in my life, it seems like it was kind of a combination because when I was assigned to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, that's when I got exposed to 5th Special Forces Group. So that was really the first time that I got to see real live active duty special forces guys out and about and be like, oh my gosh, look, those are special forces guys and they're training and they look different, they train different, all of those things. So I think it was a combination of my brain catching up and then going back in time and being like, okay, well, that's what Coach Thornburg was like. Holy shit. Like, that's really impressive. Like, even more so
Interesting.
than I was already impressed by Coach Thornburg because he was just such an awesome human being and such a great mentor. So I think it was when my brain kind of was connecting the dots, it's like,
Hmm.
oh, okay, this is what I want to do. And I think I can do this. I think I can do it.
So you end up getting into the Green Berets. You end up making it. Um, and ultimately, like you rise. So you don't just make it into the Green Berets. Ultimately, you get promoted to Master Sergeant. I mean, I'm skipping over some stuff here, but
Sure.
um, you know, you're appointed to the position of Team Sergeant for ODA 043. And I'm going to quote you here. You say, as the senior non-commissioned officer and the most experienced Green Beret on the team, you said, I was finally reaching the pinnacle of my career. That moment was 15 years in the making. It was an extraordinary privilege to have the opportunity to lead a team of my own into combat, and it was one that I didn't take lightly. Tensions in the Middle East were escalating quickly, and we were about to be in one of the world's most dangerous cities, Baghdad, Iraq. So I want to get to this because, you know, you form that dream of becoming a Green Beret, and then something about leadership starts to speak to you, and you rise to that position. So I'm curious, what was it that appealed to you about being a leader?
Yeah, that's a great question. I had this great foundation, with my West Virginia upbringing, and then to spend, 6 years in the regular army as an infantryman, light infantryman.
Hmm.
I had this great foundation, this great base, this great experience level that I was able to take to special forces, which, that's a very important part of making, in my opinion, making a very well-rounded Green Beret. Uh, so of course you kind of go through these transitions, and I grew up in special forces as a young Green Beret. My first duty assignment was in Stuttgart, Germany for 4 years.
Hmm.
And we were heavily involved in the Balkans. And you mentioned some of the missions earlier for the intro, the counter sniper security for the presidents and special reconnaissance, combat search and rescue, all those things. So I had this great experience my first 4 years in special forces, and then I had great schooling as well. So not only was I a Green Beret, I was Ranger qualified, I was a jump master, I was a sniper. So I'm collecting up all of these great, schools and additional training in addition to great experience with the missions that you and I mentioned earlier. So then, I'm a senior E7 sergeant first class. And then we're getting ready to, do the initial invasion in Iraq. And
Hmm.
we had some kind of hiccups on our leadership at that time. and which is, I mean, it happens. But you start seeing a little bit more when you get a little bit more senior. Like it's kind of like you get to that point. I got to that point where it's like, hey, I think I can do this. I think I can be a Green Beret. I think I have what it takes. And then it's kind of the same thing with, I think I have what it takes to lead my own special forces team. So after I did a rotation, the initial invasion in Iraq in 2003, I
Mm-hmm.
worked for my best friend, Matt Gerard. He was the acting team sergeant. So I got a chance to see how he led the team, and I was really inspired, and I learned a great deal from him.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next rotation to Iraq in 04, 05, I'm still a sergeant first class. And I got to see a little bit more leadership, different style. And actually, I got to see a leader that I didn't like. I don't want to model my leadership after this guy because he kind of had a different mindset, more like regular army type.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then just, being around other mentors and picking up things from them, I really started believing in my mind, like, hey, I can be a very good team sergeant. I can be very, very successful. I have the tools, I have the experience, I have the training. If that opportunity presents itself, I'm going to rise to the occasion. I know I can do this. And fortunately for me, that's what happened in 05, 2005.
Mm-hmm.
Toward the fall is when I took over ODA 043. And, with the experience that I had behind me, the training, all of those things I just mentioned, I knew that I was ready to lead a special forces team, and I was chomping at the bit. And I would like to say this about a pinnacle. It is definitely the pinnacle to lead a special forces team. Like, that's the pinnacle. But if there is a higher rung on the ladder,
Mm-hmm.
it's this: to lead a special forces team in combat. So I really was at the pinnacle of my career, leading a special forces team in combat in Baghdad. Like, it was the Super Bowl times 10. I mean, just an easy way to look at it.
So, okay, let's get into that because I really want to explore some of these deeper motivations behind your leadership. Um, so quote, you said that my vision for the team in Baghdad was to dominate. You said I wanted us to go on the offensive and take the fight to the enemy rather than sit back, play defense, and react. So this speaks to an undeniable will to win, a mastery of strategic warfare, and the drive to stand shoulder to shoulder with an elite class of warriors. At the same time, you've also shared, quote, I had a profound sense of responsibility and obligation toward the Special Forces Regiment, towards my men and their wives and their families. You said that you recognized the weight of this burden from the very beginning and you never took it lightly. It was determined to provide. So you say you were determined to provide them, your men, with every advantage and opportunity to succeed. And you say that if I had to look at a young wife in the eyes and explain why and how her husband was killed in action, it damn sure wasn't going to be because he wasn't trained, he wasn't prepared, he wasn't ready for the fight. So what I'm trying to kind of get to is it seems like these are equally compelling forces. My vision for the team in Baghdad was to dominate, go on the offensive. At the same time, I don't want to be the reason. I want my men to be safe. I don't want them to get killed in that. So it's like, you know, what drives you more, right? Is it the mission and the call to dominate and ensure victory in combat, or is it the responsibility that you carry to bring your men home alive to their families? Believe me, I'm sure it's both, but I'm just curious, like, what is the greater driver for you?
Yeah, man, that's a great deep question, and I appreciate it. Because if you can unwind some of these things, man, you could sell this and probably be a millionaire. Um, it's very deep, and I like the question. I like the question, and I think it's a combination of both. And to go back to the vision, like, hey, we wanted to be on the offensive. We didn't want to be on the defensive. We wanted to be proactive. We didn't want to be reactive. So I think, Lawrence, in my mind, the way that I reconciled this, how
Mhm.
can I do this, which is my vision, And how can I have this heavy burden. I want to bring my dudes back alive. Uh, how can I reconcile this? And to me, in my mind, in my humble opinion, it was being aggressive and it was taking the fight to the enemy. That's how I was going to keep my team alive. We weren't going to just kind of like walk on eggshells and, be risk adverse about everything. In my eyes, with my experience, I thought that's when people get hurt. That's when people get killed. And I wanted our guys to be like hungry dogs, like, hey, we're after it. We want to get after it. And that's how I felt I was going to be able to bring my guys back, was by being aggressive and not just waiting back for the enemy, because the enemy has a vote. But I do think, it's a great question. I love the question. I think they're really both important, and the military beats it in our head, from the time we enter all the way up until we retire. It's like, hey, there's two things that you need to do: accomplish the mission and take care of your people. And there's kind of a dilemma between, like, how does those two things work out? But it's like, hey, if you take care of your people, you're going to accomplish your mission. So I mean, it's a tough question. I like the question, but for me, I was going to bring my people back by being aggressive, and that's what we were able to do the whole rotation.
Yeah, I mean, for everyone that is listening, you got to read the book if you want to understand the meaning of dominate and be aggressive, because you guys are definitely taking it to the enemy. And I could see, and I could, the way you describe it, it makes sense. I could understand why, although it might seem a bit riskier, how that's actually going to lead to you being able to bring your men home alive and be successful.
And one quick thing on that too, Lawrence, if I may, I want to
Yes.
say this, and I believe this is in the book as well. It's probably not going to be, I don't remember it exactly verbatim, but it was like always aggressive, but never reckless, or something along those lines.
Yes.
And I feel like there is a fine line, you know, uh, where you can be reckless and you're just out there doing stuff that you shouldn't be doing, or dumb stuff that's going to
Mhm.
get people killed. So I like to say that we were always aggressive. We were always ready to chomp at the bit, but we were never reckless about it.
Did you see recklessness?
Um, well, I would say my definition, I think that there was a lot of recklessness going on, and I never served in Afghanistan, so I can't really speak to Afghanistan, but I'm sure that there probably was over there as well. But I do think that as a military, we probably made a lot of mistakes.
Hmm.
We had a lot of guys that we were jeopardizing by having them on convoys on the road when they probably didn't need to be.
Hmm.
You know, maybe they didn't need to take 5 gun trucks out to do a face-to-face meeting with somebody, 10 miles away. Maybe they could have just picked up the phone and had that call.
Hmm.
And, when you get guys blown up and gals blown up to do a face-to-face meeting, I think that's reckless. I don't really think that's something that we had to do. So I do think there was some of that for sure.
Um, I think some of the guys that come out that have a story to tell, like you hear sometimes, and that's why I love stories from special forces, the special ops community in general, the SEALs and the teams guys. I think there are traits and qualities and experiences that you guys bring to the table that transcend war. And as you said earlier, I mean, are useful and valuable for people in every different walk of life. But I see common traits. And, one of the things that I think leads to a lack of recklessness is what you talk about when you faced a critical leadership challenge. So there was a cutting edge cryptographic device, the CYZ-10, that you talk about how that went missing under your team's watch, And it was a situation with the potential to compromise mission security. So it was no laughing matter that this thing got lost. And you were confronted with a real high stakes decision. Point the fingers and blame the team member who you found out was responsible for the mistake, or take full accountability yourself as the team sergeant. And so I'll quote you. You said that when Colonel Tovo arrived, he asked to speak with me privately. And I nodded with a pit in my stomach because there were two ways that the conversation could go. I could point my finger and blame Bobby for his negligence and incompetence, making him the sacrificial lamb, and hope the blame didn't come back on my shoulders, or I could man up and effing own it. I could take responsibility for it as the team sergeant and hold myself accountable. But when it's your career on the line, you say, and you're faced with losing something you've worked years for, taking one for the team is a lot easier said than done. But you end up choosing to take the responsibility for the issue. So in moments like that, Darrell, when your career and your reputation, everything you've worked for is on the line, how do you find the courage to take responsibility and own the mistake, especially knowing the fallout could be absolutely devastating, right? Like you literally lose everything you lose your dream. What internal principles or lessons guided you to prioritize integrity over self-preservation? How do you teach others to make the same choice when the stakes are equally high?
Yeah, it's a great question. And just hearing that story, it brings that pit back to my stomach because it takes me all the way back to 2006. I mean, it still has that same effect on me because I remember just being that scared. Like, man, just like I said before we got into this, talking about the pinnacle on the pinnacle, it's like
Yeah.
leading a special forces team, but then it's like there's another higher step. It's leading a special forces team in combat. It's the Super Bowl times 10. It's like, man, it still kind of gives me a pit in my stomach because I was heartbroken. And I thought that was probably going to be the end for sure. But I want to say that some of the great mentors that I had going back in my career and some of my experiences in West Virginia with Coach Thornburg, of like, hey, a leader does this. A leader will step in front of his team when everything is going wrong and take responsibility. That's what a good leader does. A good leader will also be behind his team in the back when the team does something really well and they're getting accolades and attaboys and pats on the butt and all that type of stuff. A good leader will be in the back and let his team take credit. So I'd learned all of these leadership lessons. And maybe I didn't come to it immediately, Lawrence, because I kind of had that struggle. Like, it's Bobby, like Bobby's the one that, I think initially I kind of had to get over my, my anger and because it really was a kick in the stomach, man. It was a kick in the stomach. But I had to kind of get over that and work my way through it. And calm breeds calm, control what you can control. Some of those life lessons kicked in for me. And I think it was a lot of good mentorship and good leadership. And that's the way that I grew up. And I knew that when push come to shove, I'm the one I had to take that for the team because I was ultimately responsible. I was the senior guy. I didn't have a captain that was over me because the captain wasn't even in country yet. I think the captain was our captain was in Spain when this actually happened. So I was the senior guy. There was no one else I could blame. I was the guy. The buck stopped with me. And I think it was important to take responsibility for that. And I really feel in my heart of heart, Lawrence, that you and I wouldn't be having this conversation right now if I would have said, Colonel Tovo, it was Bobby. He lost it. It's his fault. You and I wouldn't be talking right now because I would have never been a team sergeant and I never would have had the great stories that are in Grit to Glory. And just as a little side note that I think is kind of fun, you may have noticed, depends on how well you like really read into some things, but Lieutenant General retired Ken Tovo. He was my colonel back then in 06 and 07, retired as a 3-star general, which, man, just such an impressive career that man had.
Wow.
But he wrote me such a nice testimonial for my book that you can see. that's in the front. And he's the chairman of the Green Beret Foundation, which is one of the nonprofits that I'm giving partial proceeds to. So it's funny how things kind of go full circle, where he had, my career in his hand. And I'm so glad and I'm so thankful that he made the decision that he did to give me a second chance. But yeah, to answer your question, though, I think it's a lot of leadership and mentorship and experience and just doing the right thing.
Yeah, it worked out for you, and I think you call it radical responsibility. I love that. Um,
Yeah.
so your team, ODA 043, was awarded the prestigious Larry Thorne Award, as I mentioned in the intro. Recognized as the best operational unit in combat during Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2006. Here's a quote: ODA 043's unique spirit and successful approach to prosecuting the war on terrorism exemplifies the true nature of the unconventional warrior and is representative of what it is to be special forces. And then, Darrell, you personally were chosen as the Army Special Forces Command recipient of the Frederick Award for Military Excellence, an award that holds an incredible level of prestige. Among the 5 active duty Special Forces groups and 2 National Guard Special Forces groups nominated, there was only 1 U.S. Special Forces recipient. And so that's a tremendous honor for you and
Very
for your
humbling,
team.
Lawrence. Very humbling.
Yeah, I mean, I could imagine. I'm curious, in your eyes, what truly set your team apart? I mean, not just in terms of skills or success, but in him, because from it's that right there that I accentuated it, right. The true nature, ODA 043 exemplifies the true nature of the unconventional warrior and is representative of what it is to be special forces. So what, you know, embodying the essence of what it means to be special forces, can you describe that for us? What intangible qualities or defining moments do you believe earned them and you that distinction?
Well, I think it's the way we started. First of all, we didn't have a great start, and we were, let's be fair, probably way at the bottom of the list, all the special forces teams, in Iraq at that time period. But I think the command and others in the leadership echelons, I think that they saw that we had that don't quit mentality, and it was like, hey, these guys weren't rattled. They put their big boy pants. They put their big boy pants on, and they got after it. And I think it goes back to being aggressive as well. We prosecuted a lot of targets, and we were good partners to our conventional forces. From the 101st. And one thing I think is important to point out, for context during this time period, we didn't have all the assets that other units, like you mentioned earlier, Lawrence, you're talking about like Delta or
Hmm.
SEALs,
Hmm.
specifically like SEAL Team 6 or British SAS and some of those guys. Uh, those units had the majority, if not all, of the assets in Iraq. Like they had signals intelligence, they had ISR platforms, they flipping had everything, man. I mean, let's be honest. We didn't have that. And we didn't let that stop us. That was like, hey, how can we work our way around this? Like, okay, we don't have all of these great assets that other units have, but
Hmm.
we can work hard. We can not quit and just keep getting after it. So I think that was part of it, as well as that we had these very creative solutions to very complex problems,
Mm.
where some of the teams might have just kind of set back and said, hey, give us some more assets and we'll figure this thing out for you. We never let that stop us. We never had that as an excuse. We did every single thing that we could to stay after it, and to stay busy, and to be contributing to prosecuting the war on terror at our level. I just think that we couldn't be stopped. We just kept on and on and on and on. And I think that's something that they saw and they appreciated and they recognized us for.
So I'm going to skip ahead here to because you brought that up. I'm going to skip ahead there because I was going to ask you this question after, and we'll double back on it. But um, so your team had to be resilient, but your team also had to be inventive and innovative to get to truly embody the spirit of the unconventional warrior. And so this is one of the pillars of your grit code. It's you talk about, and we'll get to the grit code in a moment, but I had to bring it up now. So, you talk about embracing innovation. So you highlight the vital importance of adaptability and innovation in staying ahead in combat. And you recount the formidable in the book. I mean, you recount formidable challenges of operating in Baghdad during a period of intense sectarian violence, where your team faced a cunning and well-equipped enemy that was entrenched in the complexities of urban warfare. And you underscore that in the face of such a dynamic and ever-evolving adversary, failure to adopt would inevitably lead to catastrophic consequences for you and your team. So I'll quote you. You say a fixed set of tactics repeatedly employed without variation due to narrow-minded thinking is a recipe for disaster. By embracing innovation under pressure in our tactics and strategies, we gave ourselves a fighting chance. We weren't just responding to the insurgency, we were proactively shaping our battlefield. Constant adaptability was the key to our success. It allowed us to stay one step ahead, to outthink and outmaneuver our opponents, and ultimately to achieve our mission objectives while minimizing risks to our team. So, with that said, adapting under pressure often requires swift decisions with limited information, and you got to balance that calculated risk against the potential failure. So, how do you foster that level of adaptability within a team while ensuring that they have the confidence to innovate without hesitation, even when the stakes are, in your case, life or death, right? I mean, do you ever face resistance to breaking out of those entrenched patterns, even within the Green Berets, who are supposed to be the unconventional warriors, right? Did you ever come up against resistance to taking to being innovative and adapt and being able and having to adapt under extreme circumstances?
I think that was something that I encouraged as a leader, Lawrence, was like, hey, uh, there is no bad idea. Like, let's get it out on the table and let's make people comfortable. Let's make the guys comfortable with coming up with some crazy ideas, because I surely came up with my fair share of crazy ideas and solutions, potential solutions to problems. And I think that's probably the first step, is a guy has to really feel confident and secure in his place on the team to where he can raise his hand and say, hey, excuse me, he can say, hey, I got an idea. This is really, really crazy and this is out there, but I think we should do X, Y, and Z. And to actually have the ability to talk that through instead of just saying, hey, I have an idea. It's X, Y, and Z. And it's like, you're an effing idiot. Shut up. Don't ever, don't bring that up again. I think that's probably the first step, is to kind of embrace that innovation.
Mhm.
And man, we continued to have these type of solutions to problems through that rotation. And I just think it's so important, looking back, especially, that there was a lot of people that were just, maybe they replaced a unit and the unit said, hey, we did this, this, and this. And then that unit was like, okay, we're going to do the same thing, this, and this. Well, the enemy gets a vote. And they were constantly changing their tactics, and we had to constantly change ours. And I will give one quick example to kind of, bring to light like this PhD level, of innovation, if you will. When we first went into Iraq in 2003, we were in Toyota Hilux vehicles, basically, civilian vehicles. There was no IED threat. And then, it gets into the latter part of 2003 and 2004 and 2005. And then the threat landscape starts evolving a little bit. And then they introduce IEDs. And then it was like, hey, we're going to be let's get rid of these stupid Toyota Hiluxes. Let's get these unarmored Humvees and gun trucks. We'll have a little bit of protection. We'll use sandbags and this and that. Well,
Mhm.
the IEDs, continue to evolve. And then it was like, hey, we're losing a lot of guys. We need up armored vehicles, so you're continuing. The enemy has a vote and then we have a vote. So they responded to up armored vehicles with the EFPs, the explosive formed projectiles, mainly from Iran, that would go right through an armored vehicle. So it was like PhD level chess that we were playing, Lawrence, the whole time.
Is is that level of innovation and adaptability, is that common amongst the ODAs? Is that common in the green? I know it says, unconventional warrior on the definition there, but how pervasive is your mindset and your team's mindset, given how important that was to you guys being awarded with that distinction?
Yeah, I think it's fairly standard. I mean, I think some teams probably have a little bit more than others, and it all depends too, Lawrence. I think on personalities, just like it would be like for a certain business, like a CEO. A CEO is more like traditional or not as risk adverse, and then you have another CEO that's
Hmm.
really ready to push the envelope a little bit more. I think it's similar in special forces. Some of it's a leadership personality.
Hmm.
um, but yeah, I think that there are a lot of very creative, unique Green Beret leaders and teams out there, that every single day, even as we speak here today, that are solving very complex problems with little to no assets.
So if you want to be an innovator, uh, get your ass into Army Special Forces, come out the other side, and really do some amazing things.
There you
Um,
go.
let's talk about life after the Green Berets. So you make no bones about the difficulty in transitioning from a psychology rewired for conquering and surviving in the most extreme life or death scenarios, and the challenging need to recalibrate that mindset to the mundane normalcy of a safe and routine civilian life. So I'll quote you here. You say that combat isn't just a job, it's a lifestyle that rewires your body and your mind. So, can you describe that rewiring and why this lifestyle becomes, as you say, addictive?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, when you're putting it all on the line and you're making life and death decisions almost daily, or you're eliminating enemy threats and they are trying to eliminate you, then the stakes couldn't be any higher. I mean, it's life and death. Um, it gets addicting. It's at such at a high level. It's almost like a drug. Um, and there were some days, like I think I talk about it in the book, like April 17th, in particular, the morning of April 17th, 2006, we woke up and all hell was breaking loose in Adamia. And it was almost like, hey, you guys didn't let us know, like, all this stuff's going on. You don't need us. Like, we almost felt left out, like we weren't included. I think we mentioned something in there. It's like you didn't get you didn't get invited to the rave party or whatever. But
Right.
it really does get addictive just because of the stakes are so high. And I think a lot of it too is the confidence that you have in yourself and you have in your teammates, and that domination, and hey, we're going to be on the offensive and we're going to be proactive. All of those things kind of like mix in, and it's like a really powerful drug.
Hmm.
And then when you get back home and you're doing routine, hey, let's go to Home Depot and pick some stuff up on a Sunday, and then we're going to watch the football game, and it's almost like, what? This is what we're doing, and that your colleagues are still, basically playing in the Super Bowl and they're in Iraq. Like, it was kind of a tough pill to swallow, and it took me a little while to work through all that. To be honest, Lawrence, it's quite a contrast.
Yeah, I mean, it must be. I think, I think when you or I think as you put it, when you're so used to that adrenaline, riding that wave and that rush, you come back to the humdrum nature of the daily grind in civilian life. I can only imagine, you talk about it rewiring your mind to conquer, like rewiring the mind to, right, to be able to live in an environment where you have to dominate, where you have to be aggressive, where you have to, right, like that it's really not happening in the office, right?
No,
Um, there's
not at
there
all.
it actually brings me. I'll come back to the to where I was going, but now there's another question I think that kind of speaks to where the mind's at or the mindset itself, because there's a story you recount in the book where you and your team were called to assist the 101st during a firefight in Baghdad. And when you arrived, you found yourself in the midst of complete chaos. Injured Iraqi soldiers, well entrenched and highly trained enemy force, daunting challenge of navigating an urban battlefield under the constant threat of friendly fire. And you write that upon linking up with the 101st guys, you were briefed on the situation. The enemy force was substantial in size, well equipped, displayed advanced combat tactics. It was made clear that it was not an ordinary group of neighborhood watch boys trying to protect their territory. You were dealing with hardened insurgents determined to engage in combat. And you say, I couldn't have been happier with the news. You told so right. We're talking about that rewiring of the mind. Like here, you're like what do you mean happy? Like right, but this is what you've signed up for. So you say, okay, I couldn't be happier with that news. All bets are off. No mercy, no hesitation, no remorse. Now we could pound the hammer of power, force, and violent action until the enemy was obliterated. So that mindset is striking, Darrell, in its clarity and its intensity and its honesty. But I wonder, are there ever moments in combat when mercy and hesitation or even remorse creep in, either during or after the fight for a seasoned combat operator?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I would say I probably reflected a lot more on that as I've gotten older, Lawrence.
Mm-hmm.
But just to give you a little bit of context for that mind frame that you described, and we're talking about April 17th.
Yep.
We spent so much time trying to pursue the enemy, trying to target the enemy, and try to find the enemy in this very complex, sophisticated environment. So it was actually, like it was a great feeling to be like, oh, the guys that you're looking for, they're right there. And also to kind of go back to what we were used to, like the guys that were protecting their neighborhood, they would do like these little hit and run attacks, and they would kind of like fire a couple rounds and then they would just disappear. And that would be so frustrating for us. It's like, oh man, it was just kind of like they'd fire a couple rounds, just a harassment fire, and then they would roll. So to actually have fighters that were willing to go toe to toe, it was like, hell yeah, man, let's do this. But I think to answer your question though, I think I would like to answer it with my age and maturity and where I'm at now, and I'm reflecting on the war in Iraq, because at the time that I was fighting the war, I was a soldier. I was told to be there. I was told to execute, and we executed. Politics aside, president aside, it was just like, hey, we do what we're told, we execute, and that's the way it's supposed to be. That's the way it is.
Yep.
But now that I've reflected on it, I probably do have a little bit more remorse. Uh, that, hey, you know what? There were probably a lot of guys that we were fighting that were more like nationalists, that were like, hey, I'm from Iraq. This is my country. I'm an Iraqi.
Mm-hmm.
These people are here. They shouldn't be here.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to fight these dudes. Like, I'm going to try to protect my neighborhood and my community because of
Right.
whatever's going on with the Iraqi police, the Iraqi army, the American army, the British, whatever. So I do have those type of feelings now, uh, that I reflect back on. Hey, was it right? Was it wrong? And I feel like I can have these opinions as a civilian now that
Hmm.
I've already served my country.
Hmm.
Um, and I do have those feelings. I think that we probably, well, I know we went toe to toe with a lot of people that were just trying to protect their country, just like we would do, Lawrence, if someone invaded the United States and was trying to make us do a certain thing. We would most likely fight back.
Yeah, I mean, upon reflection, now you see that, but that's part of your transition. I think that just served as a really good metaphor for what you were describing there about how the mind gets rewired for that task, for exactly what you were meant to do when you were there and doing it at the top of your game, Super Bowl level. But then you have to come back from that and, somehow weave your way back into the hamster wheel of civilian life, right? So you mentioned, so here's what you mentioned, and you've said it a few times now. So now I think we should touch on it. Control what you can control. You say that mindset was pivotal in navigating that transition back to civilian life. Can you share what this principle truly means to you, particularly in the context of finding balance after the battlefield, right? Like, what are the most impactful aspects that are within your control that helped you rediscover purpose and motivation in a life that's far removed from that intensity of combat?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to take a step back just to talk about the grit code, just generally. The grit code simply means, it's principles that will help you navigate through life. I like to say also like a blueprint for life. Like, hey, these principles of the grit code will help you navigate through life, not military life, not, I mean, it transcends, like I said earlier. So I think these are important principles that someone can pull and use in their everyday life for whatever it is they're doing, nurse, policeman, entrepreneur, whatever it might be. But for control what you can control, I think it's so important. And it kind of does go back to the missing piece of equipment. I couldn't control what the decision that my leadership was going to make. Like, I had no control what Colonel Tobo, he's going to fire me, he's going to keep me. Like, if I would have just focused on that and really stressed myself out and worried about it, that's a lot of lost energy. All I could really control was how I reacted and how I took responsibility, that radical ownership. So for the control what you can control, especially on the transition part, Lawrence, to me, it's like, hey, there's certain things that I can control. Like, I can be pissed off at the VA, or pissed off because this guy got a certain rating, or this gal got this rating and it's getting this much money. Like, I mean, you got to let some of that stuff go and just focus on what you can control. You can control your health. You can control your mental health. You can control your spirituality. You can control your friendships. Taking care of yourself. All of those things. I believe the control what you can control principle is very, very important. And those things that are outside your control, sometimes you just got to push it to the side and let it go and just be done with it.
Yeah. So uh, control what you can control is the reason I wanted to ask you about that is because people have these mantras which on the surface make a lot of sense. Control what you can control. That makes a lot of sense. But then I think what a lot of people leave out, which you don't in this book, which I think is really important, is what does that actually mean? Like, what is it that you can actually control? And as you say, your choice to, negatively or positively impact the people around you, that's something you have control, right? Your perspective and outlook on life, again, that you talk about this in the book, you have control over that. And, you know, as you were alluding to, control what you control is one of the key principles of the grit code, which, is where you start getting into really these lessons for life. Control what you can control. Here they are. Control what you can control. Eradicate arrogance. Possess an extreme work ethic. Adopt a no surrender mindset. Embrace innovation. Calm breeds calm. relentlessly execute, courage is contagious. I love these. I mean, these are great. These are just so powerful. But in the book, you describe all of them. You give a lot of, insight into what each of those mean. And I could already, like, you could see like what really got you to where you were going. Some of this stuff is what you start to learn much later when you're in the Green Berets and in leadership, like embrace innovation, right? Relentlessly execute, courage is contagious. Some of these you had way back, which is how you somehow made it to the Green Berets, right? When you were like, how am I going to do that? I'm not the stereotype, which is like
Yeah.
adopt a no surrender mindset. Like that's where you talk about how, hey, you're not born a Green Beret. It's not predetermined. Like anyone can do it, assuming you have no surrender mindset, and you will be tested. But I want you to elaborate on calm breeds calm. So here's the thing. You say in the book that you had a choice to make. You could run. So this is from that instance, right? I think it's April 17th. I think this is the one where you talk about how you could either. So you get to the scene and you have to get out and go to the command center, and you're like, I could either run the distance and attempt to minimize the danger when I step out of this vehicle, which seemed like the obvious thing to do. But you say at the first sight of you doing a Tom Cruise sprint to the command post, everyone watching would switch to panic mode. And that's not a good thing. You said you couldn't afford to have a bunch of panic men on your hands, not thinking clearly. Panic people do strange things. Panic people get people killed. That left option number two, which was, I love this. I could walk quickly but calmly to the command post. No sprinting, just a nice smooth pace as if I were headed into Gino's Pizza on Fifth Avenue back in West Virginia before the college crowd hit after a football game. Right? Like, so apparently you chose the walk to Gino's Pizza move. Uh, real calm, really relaxed, bullets flying overhead. So this obviously embodies that calm breeds calm mindset when you choose to walk and not to run to the command post while you're under that fire. But in that moment, when the bullets are flying and the chaos of war is all around you, you're actually risking your life to set it. I mean, this can't really be understated. You're risking your life to set an example of composure for your team. Can you talk more about the that calm breeds calm attitude? How do you cultivate this, especially under high stakes, high pressure situations like that?
Yeah, I think it goes back to preparation and training and one of the things that I bring up in Grit to Glory, it's like, hey, you never rise to the occasion, you rise to your level of training. So having some of those shared experiences and being in dangerous situations, I think is really important. And it's the same thing like when I talked about Comrades Com and I'm briskly walking to the Iraqi command post. It's the same thing when you're talking to someone on the radio and the other person is really stressed out and freaked out and you're just that calm, cool, composed, voice on the other end. It seems to kind of level people off that that they're talking to someone that's not so excited and freaking out or yelling. It just seems to calm things down. And I think this is something that's seen a lot in the military. It's seen a lot in sports. It's seen a lot in big business at the highest levels. And I think it's such a great principle that actually works and settles people down and makes them kind of think through. So I think for me, being able to do the calm breeds calm is because I'd had a lot of life experiences. I had a lot of training. I'd been in dangerous situations before, and I knew how guys responded. So I think that was something that I wouldn't say it's natural, but it's definitely a learned principle. And I do think it's effective for keeping people calm and keeping people alive.
Um, it. You have those moments in the book, those road to Damascus moments, those Damascene moments where You can either choose to take the responsibility or to not. Like where you can either choose to walk out of that vehicle and kind of be cool, calm, and collected and walk to Gino's Pizza, or not, right? Like so the thing about the grid code and these really important mantras that basically make or break greatness, and achieving those big things. Uh, it's what it's one thing to know them, and it's one thing to do them when the moment comes, when the time and the place is calling you, and you know you embody those philosophies. And I think that's the difference that makes the difference. It's one thing to know the grid code, but it's another thing to actually live up to it when the time comes. I'm not sure really, everyone has that in them. In fact, I know most people don't have that in them. How does one actually develop grit? Like, how do you know what I mean? Like, you can learn it, but what is it about having grit when the time comes? Like, how do you prepare to exhibit it, execute on it?
Yeah, I think it's learned life experiences, and I like to define grit. I like to say 3D.
Okay,
3D is grit. It's determination despite difficulty. So you can see
there it
the
is.
3D. Yeah, determination despite difficulty. And I think looking back over my life, Lawrence, I defined it over and over and over. And I think, if there is a younger person that I'm speaking to, the 16, 17, 18-year-old Darrell, it's like, hey man, take those lumps, take those life lessons, but keep going. You know, Sometimes setbacks and failures are disguised as opportunities. So don't just quit because you have a setback. Like keep going, keep rocking along, keep moving, because that's how you learn and that's how you develop that grit, is just keep going. And I know for me, a lot of it, I kind of had I'll say a little bit of a chip on my shoulder coming from West Virginia, because the stereotypical West Virginian, and it's like, I heard it my whole career in the military. It's like, oh, you must have got your first pair of boots when you joined the military, or you have all your teeth. Are you sure you're from West Virginia? And it's a bunch of silly stuff, but I
Mhm.
kind of take it in stride now. It's like it's a chip that I have on my shoulder, because there's some just great people from West Virginia. It's just blue collar, hardworking, patriotic, love their country. That's my home state, so I always love West Virginia. But I think to develop that grit, you got to keep going, don't quit, keep working, stay after it. And I think that's how you kind of build those things up. Those little small things just continue to build, layer upon layer.
Yeah, it's one of the things you talk about in the code is, and I'm not, like, you hear variations on calm breeds calm or control what you can control. I like the way you define it. One you don't hear too often is this, eliminate arrogance, right? Like, what about that? Like, if you can expound on that a little bit,
Yeah.
because I think it's overlooked, but super important.
Yeah, yeah. Eradicate arrogance. To me, that's super, super important. And I think from the very first moment that a candidate steps foot at Camp McCall to go through Special Forces assessment selection, or to go through Special Forces qualification course, it's almost like someone is beating humbleness into your body from day one. So I think it's critically important. And I think if you take a step back and you look at it, who's more teachable, who's more coachable, someone that's humble and is hungry to learn, or someone that's super arrogant and full of himself. And I think that, that's a very easy one to answer. And I also, I often like to tell a story, Lawrence, and I think it's kind of telling if you've never been around special forces guys or you've never been on a special forces team. I typically tell a story. What happens when a brand new Green Beret shows up to his very first team? And I think this goes very well with eradicate arrogance, because if you think about it, it's a brand new Green Beret, so probably a younger guy, uh, extremely fit, in shape, confident, full of himself, just completed some of the hardest training in the military, has the privilege to wear the Green Beret, so just fired up and ready to do Green Beret stuff. But do you know what that guy typically does the first couple of weeks that he's on a team? He does this. He typically takes out the trash. He sweeps the floor. He cleans the bathrooms. He picks up brass. And as a team sergeant, there are often times where after a few days go by, you can tell the person's kind of dejected. And you're like, hey, man, what is everything good? Like, what's wrong? It's like, I wanted to do Green Beret stuff. And all I'm doing is like cleaning up stuff. And it's like, well, hey, first of all, we don't have our own janitorial team that just picks up after us. If you weren't here, we would be doing these things. And oh, by the way, these are very important, critical things, because I need to be able to trust you to do the small things very well. Because if I can't trust you to do these small things very well, how am I going to trust you in a firefight when Al Qaeda militants are trying to kill me and you and the rest of the guys? Like, I need to be able to trust you. Like, it goes back to, you don't rise to the occasion, you rise to your level of training. So that eradicate arrogance, I think it's so important. You got to be teachable. You got to be coachable. And no one likes to be around those arrogant folks anyway. So I just think it's a very, very important principle.
Because there's a fine line, right? Like between arrogance and confidence. Like, there's a fine line between it. Sometimes you have to, and we're not just talking quietly confident. Like sometimes when you need a level of confidence in doing what you did, that is going to allow you to be in a position to be calm, so that breeds calm, courageous, right? So that others can become courageous. There's a level of confidence there that you have to reach, while at the same time, as you say, being humble. That's not an easy thing to do. And I guess unless someone goes through what you went through, and is put in positions where they have to humble themselves, or where they're humbled, and then start to kind of get some self-awareness, then they'll never. I think developing grit is going to be really tough to do unless you're being put in a situation where you either have been beaten up by life so badly that you're finally humbled, or you put yourself in a situation like you did in joining the military and then the Green Berets, where you're going to get that humbling experience. Otherwise, how else do you know what I mean? Like, how does someone reading your book, who wants to kind of follow the grit code, wants to learn from you and learn those lessons, how do they eradicate arrogance without, did they find a situation? Do you suggest finding a situation where you can truly understand what it is to be humble?
I think it's important for that individual that's trying to follow the grit code is remain teachable, remain coachable. And I have to share this too, Lawrence. Like, I had a big, huge piece of humble pie, the 2004, 2005 rotation to Iraq. Like, I had a huge piece of humble pie. I was a senior sergeant first class E7, and I was doing a lot of the targeting for the team.
Mm-hmm.
And that's basically trying to find the enemy networks and the enemy, the bad guys and all those type of things. And a mission came up from one of my colleagues, and it was basically a cache recovery. So there weren't like bad guys. It was a cache recovery. And I took a very arrogant perspective on this mission, and it was like beneath me. Like, this is beneath me to do a cache recovery. And and I was like, hey, I'm good. I'm gonna so the team went out and they did the mission, they conducted the mission, but I was like, hey, I'm gonna keep doing my targeting, keep looking for bad guys and tracking bad guys. You guys go out and dig up dirt and look for cache stuff. Like, that was way beneath me. And a guy that took my seat in the vehicle was a National Guard guy from the 178th Regimental Combat Team. Uh, and that was the unit that was notorious or infamous for the Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld engagement. If you remember all the way back then, when this kid from the 178th was like, hey, sir, what about our armor? And it's like, hey, you go to war with what you have. If you remember that interaction, it was all over the news, but that was the unit, the 178th. So we were partnered with them in 0405. But the guy that took my spot in that mission, on that mission, was a guy from the 178th Regimental Combat Team, and they ended up, surprisingly, shockingly, they ran into an Al Qaeda training camp out in the middle of effing nowhere. Out in the middle of effing nowhere, it was like an L-shaped ambush, and they ended up taking care of business. I think they killed 20 to 30 dudes that day. Unfortunately, we did have two friendly killed in action from the 178th, but multiple silver stars, multiple valor awards, like one of these unique missions that you can talk about the rest of your life. And I wasn't there because I was arrogant and I thought the mission was beneath me. And I learned from that very moment, Lawrence, I was like, hey, I will never make that mistake again. And if I have vehicles leaving, our compound, I will be part of every single one of them that I possibly can, no matter how insignificant it is. So I learned that when I was a team sergeant, when our guys left the compound, I was going to be in those vehicles, man, because I learned that lesson. So I know that's a long answer to your question, but I just think that you got to stay teachable, stay coachable. And I think that, like you said, there's a fine line between arrogant and confident. Arrogant people have to constantly advertise that how great they are to everybody. Like, everybody needs to know because they're constantly advertising. A humble person doesn't need to do that. You can basically tell how they approach things and when they walk into the room. But to try to pick that up, I think it's just stay teachable, stay coachable. When you think that you know more than everybody else, you're probably wrong.
Well, what a great lesson to learn and to describe, to really put a capstone on that point of the grit code, eradicate arrogance. Being and learning how to truly be humble, because if you're not in these situations, it's hard to really understand what it means. But I think that story you just told really drives it home. I really, that there it is right there, right? Like, man, you never know what you're going to miss out on in life, and you never know what you're going to have the opportunity to do when you show humility and when you stay teachable and stay coachable. You think maybe you're doing the job that you shouldn't be doing, or maybe you think that you're being burdened with something you shouldn't be burdened because you're better than that. But in truth, it's in those moments that you truly find yourself, that you truly find what you're capable of, and incredible things can happen, and amazing doors can open. So, super powerful. You know what? You've been so generous with your time, Darrell. This is I could probably talk to you for another hour and a half because there's so much more in this book, and there's other elements of the grit code that we could dig deep into. But I have one more question for you.
Okay.
So, I put that book down and I was like, man, some really cool stories in there. And it was a bit of a rush, a lot of it. And I hear that you're thinking of writing another one. So is that the case? Are you gonna is there gonna be a part two to the boys in ODA 043?
There's a great possibility. It all depends on how well received this book is.
Hmm.
So far, it's been extremely well received. It came out as a Amazon #1 new release on December 3rd, which I was just so humbled by, Lawrence. It was very humbling to me, uh, and it was unexpected. And then we had problems, which is a good problem to have, but we had problems keeping the book, at Amazon because people were ordering it so fast and things like that. So,
That's a real
so we
problem.
had, yeah, it's a good problem to have. And I wanted to show off, if I may, I wanted to show off if I can.
Yeah.
Uh, this is another copy of Grit to Glory, but it's the paperback. And oh
Ah,
man, I'm so happy with how this came out.
that looks
It's such
nice.
a good looking, it's
Yeah.
such a good looking book. But because of the problems that we had when we launched it initially, because everyone was buying it, uh, like I said, it's a good problem. But we had to go to print on demand, like for the main Amazon distribution centers.
Okay.
If say they get like 20 orders in Idaho and in Washington State, whatever that main Amazon distribution center is, they can do print on demand and they can get them kicked out like that day or the next day. So they can just print them. They're not waiting for my publishing company all the way down in Florida to send 20 books out to Idaho and Washington State. So we had to go to paperback print on demand. We're getting ready to go to hardcover print on demand because people are wanting to read the book. And
Mhm.
I am getting ready. I'm just a little nervous about it. I'm getting ready to start reading the Audible version of Grit to Glory. And all of those Audible connoisseurs, I like to talk about my former colleague at the Medal of Honor Museum, Betsy Udy. She's the chief financial officer. She is a huge connoisseur of Audible books. And she's like,
Okay.
Darrell, you have to read this book yourself. Like, do not even tell me that you're thinking about someone else reading it. It has to be you. You have to read this book. It's your book. So I'm starting to read it probably today or maybe tomorrow. And hopefully that'll be ready in January. So I'm really, really fired up about that. But to answer your question, sorry, I got off on a
Oh
tangent
no,
there.
that's great.
But the things that we did, Lawrence, in 2007, and I think I make mention of this in the teaser, it really makes 2006 kind of look like, kindergarten type stuff because
Wow.
2007, we were a force to be reckoned with. In 2006, the command and the leadership said, hey, we want ODA 043 to take care of Adamia and primarily be responsible for that area. Well, because we did such a good job in 2006, in 2007, our command said, ODA 043, you guys are the main effort. You got the whole country of Iraq. That's
Oh,
your playground. Here's the keys to a Ferrari. Go get it. And we did. So we had some amazing, amazing missions that we were able to do, and we did a lot of damage. There's a lot of great stories in there. So if this book does really well and there's demand for a sequel or a part two, I would be happy to put that together. I actually had a really good experience. It was therapeutic for me
mhm.
in writing this. I didn't realize that it was going to be therapeutic for me, Lawrence, but I did. I did learn that one. It's tough too. It's tough and challenging, but if there's demand, I will certainly write a part two.
Well, that I'll tell you what, I really hope there is because, again, you leave it off as a teaser at the end, but I can only imagine what you guys ended up getting yourselves into and out of. It certainly it's an exciting, action-packed, but again, filled with insight and guidance and life lessons type of book that I highly recommend our audience gets a hold of and reads through. I, I think that anyone that is interested in improving themselves and in leveling up, hearing it from someone who's telling it through the stories that you're able to narrate will receive a much more credible impact than just kind of reading a self-help book. And the self-help book on the grit code, which just talks about the code, hearing it from a Green Beret leader who's been through what you've been through and talks with such candor, such humility, vulnerability, and life experience. I'll tell you what, it makes a difference, and I'll tell you right now, that's the difference that makes the difference because it's authentic, it's genuine, and it's full of grit.
All right.
So,
I love it.
thank you so much, Darrell, for doing the show. We really appreciate you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for your service. Um, Absolutely amazing story. And where can before we part ways, where can our audience find you? Where can they, do you have a website or, some socials you want to promote?
Sure. First of all, you can get the book wherever you like to buy books. You can get it at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever. You can also get it through my publishing company, Ballast Books. So wherever you like to get books, it is available. You can pick it up. I would encourage you to do so. It's a great read. If you want to follow me, I do a lot of my social on Instagram and LinkedIn. My LinkedIn is DARRELL-UTT, and my Instagram is Darrell.Utt. So I typically post a lot of, I'm posting a lot about the book right now. I'm posting a lot of like Throwback Thursday type stuff with the military. I post a lot of motivational stuff. So you can definitely find me. You can reach out to me, DM me on Instagram or LinkedIn. I'm primarily using kind of my LinkedIn as like my website right now while I build out my own website. Also, if you pick up a copy of the book, you'll notice toward the end, I have an email address in there. I've had a few people reach out to me. So feel free to reach out. That's the whole reason I put my email address in there. You could reach out and say, hey, I loved your book. I hated your book, or, write another one, whatever it is you want to send me. But I would like to say this: the ultimate compliment that you could give me as an author for Grit to Glory is to go to Amazon and write a review. That is like the top ultimate compliment that you could give me, is to write a review, because it really helps the algorithm and all those type of things. And it makes it, like, hey, people are reading this book. They like the book. I think we have 11 or 12 reviews right now. We're trying to get a lot more. But I really think that this book has an important message. And I think if it could help some people out there. And Lawrence, if I may, I wanted to talk about this one quick thing, because I think it's so important what your show does for people. And it's really hard to quantify, the value that you may be bringing through your podcast and talking to folks and telling their stories, and you asking these very insightful, deep questions, just like, what does it mean? Like, does it help anybody? I'd like to read one quick thing that someone from another podcast, a producer, sent me after I was on their podcast, because I think this is the value of what you do, Lawrence, with your podcast. And she says, thank you, Darrell. We're so grateful for you and hope the book signings are going well. Also, we have been receiving great feedback on your podcast episode, including one individual who reached out saying that your words helped them through a rough weekend. They repeated, "Don't quit." And that really encouraged them. So thank you for impacting people's lives in such a powerful way. So Lawrence, this is my thank you for what you do with your show, because you, my friend, are impacting people's lives. You may not know it, you may not hear about it, but you are impacting people's lives and you are making a difference. And I'm very grateful for what you do. So thank you, sir.
Darrell Utt, Grit to Glory, amazing stuff. Thank you so much. You definitely have a review coming from me. I'll write that. I'll get that up there. I implore everyone, get the book. And tell you what, can't wait till the next one. We'll have more stories to talk about. We'll have you on the show again. Alpha Human Podcast. We are out.